Hi, everybody. Well, hopefully a few of you know me. I see a few familiar names, but I'm Jackie Ackerman. I've been with Pearson for seems like donkey's years, but about 15 or more years. I hold senior positions on both the papers. And if you're an examiner, I'm sure we've crossed paths at some time. I'm just going to mention that because I would do it at the end, but we've got a lot of things to talk about today, and we've only got that hour. So I might end up forgetting, and this is probably one of the best pieces of advice I can give you. If you're not an examiner, I really recommend, even if you just do it for 1 year, it's the best CPD you can ever do. It really is. And from my own personal experience, I started teaching it properly once I had that experience of being an examiner. It just changes everything. So it really is worth doing. Like I said, I would have said that at the end, but we've got a lot of content to get through. I asked for the chat to be disabled because I'm not going to be able to monitor it. I'm not going to be able to actually look at that whilst I'm presenting this, because there is just me. Nash is helping me with the tech side, but she won't be able to answer any history questions. I want to try and leave enough time at the end that there are questions that you can ask me, and I can open up the mic and you can ask me then. So hopefully we'll have time for that, but I want to get through the important stuff. So today is feedback on the exam. It's not looking at each question individually. It's not about me saying what candidates should or should not have written. Instead, really what I think you want to know is what candidates did which was successful, what they did that was unsuccessful, so you can improve your candidate's future performance. So we've got an hour. There are 3 elements to this presentation. We've got paper 1, and then the 2 separate parts of paper 2. So we are going to be, like I said, we're going to be moving at pace, and I'm going to be providing generic comments which you can apply to whatever topic that your candidates are studying. So, and then hopefully we'll have that opportunity for questions at the end. So we'll go through the slides. The examples that I'll put on will just be brief examples from Nazi Germany, the First World War, and medicine. And I've tried to build in a little bit of you time that you can have a little bit of time to ponder, and we'll see how that works time-wise. Okay, so like I said, this session is going to provide feedback on this year's exam. I mean, I've said generic issues. It's about feedback on this year's exam rather than generic advice. But hopefully, I'm wanting my comments to kind of help you apply this to future exams. So I'm going to be saying things like successful candidates did this rather than they should do this. So, forgive me if I misspeak on that. That's what I'm trying to say, is what successful candidates actually did, so you can implement that in your teaching. So to begin, there actually are a number of serious errors which some candidates made this summer, and that seriously impacted on their performance. So the first thing, if we look at the slide here, answered all the questions. It's really vital to answer the right number of questions, even if they really think they don't know and I can't answer that, or the answer is a bit sketchy. If they don't answer, that 0 mark is going to really have a big impact on the overall mark. So that's really important. In this year's exam, successful candidates generally avoided lengthy or over lengthy responses to the smaller number of mark questions. And that help. Timing is a massive thing here. So you really need to get that across to them to really stick to the timings that you've gone through with them. They really thought about that. The really successful candidates really thought about what each answer was worth in terms of the mark. So, and how many examples had to be given. So they really got an idea of how long the answers should be. So that's really the best way to get that across to them. The other thing I want to point out is about dates. Successful candidates really took note of the dates to avoid writing about things that, you know, might be excellent history, but can't be credited. So they really, that is important. They need to take a close note of any dates given in the questions. And the thing is, the dates are there to save candidates having to do too much work anyway. High scoring candidates demonstrated an understanding of what was required in the question. And really, success in the exam often revolved around knowing what to do to answer this question, rather than just knowing all the history of it. They really understood, okay, I know the history, but what have I got to do to answer this question in the right way? So they basically, like this last bullet point, they demonstrated an understanding of the demands of the different question types. And as you know, there are only 3 types on paper 1, and there are 6 on paper 2. Okay, so let's have a look at paper 1, question A. Just going to give you a little bit of this ponder time. So for each question we look at, depending on how we get on with time, I'm hoping to give you a little bit of ponder time to invite you to think about what candidates ought to do to score well, and what they might have done that might have hindered their performance. And I'm not going to ask you to feedback, it's just really for you to think about what you think is needed, and then you can see if that's what we actually saw in the exam. So I'll just give you a minute there. So we're really looking at what was the key to success on this question, and what common mistakes did candidates make. This is typically a question that I've seen over the years that a lot of candidates struggle with, really, but it is getting better. It's better year on year. So obviously schools are really getting to grips with what's required for it. So to be successful, they need to understand that they're not being asked about what the extract says, but they've got to consider why it says what it says. The extract should not be considered as a source from what, they're going to extract information from this source, but they need to consider the source as a whole to understand why the historian wrote in the way they did. So it's about the extract being written by the historian to create an impression. So their task is to decide, what that impression is and how the author is creating it. So looking at successful candidates, they were not looking at just what the extract said, they were considering why it said those things. So we look at this very simple football example here. So someone has said, your football team is rubbish. I see it was thrashed 3-0 on Saturday. What impression did the speaker want to create? And how has the language done that? And really, for those really top answers, you need to think about what's missing. Now, it's not necessary to think about what's missing to get full. You can still get full marks without doing that, but it's a lot easier for them to get the full marks if they do include that. So what is missing that might have undermined that impression? So really, from just this very simple one, what I was trying to get across here is the impression is that the football team is not good. Well, how do we know that? Because they've said the football team is rubbish, and they're using language like thrashed, meaning they were easily beaten. But what they haven't said is that actually the team have won the last however many games. They might have won the last 3 games, 6 games, however many games, and they're actually a very good team. So that's really what we're looking at here. So if we look at the Germany passage, Let's do the same thing here. You'll probably spot this was taken from this year's exam. So just scan over that fairly quickly. Hopefully you've all seen that. And really what we're looking for there is considering the author's selection, really considering why the author has chosen to do things in the way that they have done that. So the question was, what impression does the author give about protest in Germany in the years 1918 to 1919? And basically, the author is given the impression that the protests were not successful. But I really want to clarify that you don't want your candidates to say, well, it gives a negative impression, because that is meaningless unless they support that with what they mean. So we see a lot of that where they'll say, oh, it's a positive impression or it's a negative, and actually then they don't go on to clarify what they mean. So this Germany one is saying it wasn't successful, and the main points there that we would be looking for is that it didn't lead to the changes that the workers wanted, the language, words like uncoordinated, poorly organized, easily crushed. I saw a really nice one that talked about the adverbs in there, just really using the language, showing how the author has used the language. They need to talk about selecting evidence that's focused on failure, things like they were few in number, they didn't have strong leadership, things like that. But they could talk about what the author is focused on and left out. So they could say, well, okay, they've focused on this failure, but they've ignored some of the successes. So they could give an example of them gaining temporary control in Bavaria, something like that. So that's really what we're looking for there. If they do give one, an omission, like I just said about the Bavaria, it needs to make sure that it's related to the question. Sometimes you'll see some random information brought in that doesn't relate to the question, and they don't link it there. They might want to focus on emphasis, that it's been exaggerated. And really, that's what happened on that question. So like I said, we do see quite a lot of poorly answered ones on this, but it is getting better. So let's move on to one that is typically done very well, which is the paper one, question B. So this is seemingly nice and straightforward for the majority of candidates. Just a couple of things. I'll give you that's about 30 seconds to just ponder what you think is the key to success on this and what common mistakes are made. So these questions are not about the topic given, but it's about impact. So candidates shouldn't just provide lots of stuff on the topic. To get into that top level, they need to do two things. So to get into the top level, they need to show how it led to the outcome. But also, they will not get out of level 2, even if the quality is excellent, if they only talk about one consequence. So we're still seeing a few really good answers and only talk about one consequence, and then they're stuck at 4 marks. So into the level 2. So to get into that level 3, 2, and how it led to the outcome. So they can be linked. They're usually linked. like I've said there, but really good candidates, make it nice and easy. They'll do it into separate paragraphs, but not always. We obviously mark what they've written, but that does make it clear. Okay, so moving on to question C. I'll just give you a little bit of time here. About a minute to think, what was the key success to this question and what common mistakes did candidates make? So those candidates who were successful this year understood that the Part C questions may not be about the most obvious thing in the question. So if we look at this question, the most significant method of control used by the Nazis in Germany was the use of propaganda. This question was not about propaganda, and successful candidates saw this. And this question is about whether propaganda was the most significant way Hitler kept control. It was about methods of keeping control. So candidates had to analyze different ways in which the Nazis kept control, but to consider their effectiveness and hopefully reach a judgment on which one was more important. Perhaps one had more long-term impact, or perhaps other factors depended on it. So we want really 3 at least examples. So in this case, we're talking about methods of control. And since the question also talked about significant, candidates had to say, what was it, how effective the methods were, was it significant or not? Was one more significant than the rest? And the comments I've made here apply equally to the 16-mark question in paper 2 on section B. Okay, so if we look at paper 2, section A, question A, I'll give you a minute to have a ponder. What was the key to success on this question and what common mistakes did candidates make? So sometimes they can overcomplicate things. So there are no hidden traps in this question. Just think of 2 aspects and write a dozen or so lines on each. That's it. No comparison, no consideration of what was the most important, etc. So, we're talking about AO1 here. Candidates need to show their knowledge. So sometimes they can see features and they think they've got to talk about the most important features. It just means aspects of knowledge. So there are 6 marks for this question. So there's no need to really to write over lengthy responses. All that you need is a decent amount of detailed stuff. So it's really showing that they can find two aspects of the topic. They can write 5 to 6 lines of detail. They need to show, nice factual information. They need to write relevant stuff. The first thing we'll do is look and see, does it have the 2 features? Because again, they'll need those 2 features to get above 4 marks. And they need to explain it well, showing good knowledge and understanding. Okay, so just a little bit time to ponder for this one. What was the key to success on this question? Now, it's a shame with this one, this summer, to see candidates deciding that the 2 sources, they either did or did not agree, and then providing an answer to prove it. That's not what they need to do to be successful. To be successful, they must show similarity and difference. They've got to then prove it by quoting the sources, and then hopefully be able to weigh up the degree of similarity or difference. Perhaps they might conclude that in certain areas they agree, at certain topics agree, but then in others they disagree. So we wouldn't be asking the question if there weren't 2 sides excuse me, to the answer. So they must support from the sources. Now, the degree of support needed evaluating. So perhaps the sources do largely agree, or perhaps there were aspects where they agreed and where they didn't. There's no requirement here to explain why the sources agree or differ. So they don't want to waste time talking about reliability. So they're not going to get any credit for that. So again, they don't need to write over lengthy responses. There are 8 marks for this question. So there's no need. We did see a few that went on to extra paper on this question. There's no need for that. Typically they would get the 8 marks early on, and then they've spent a lot more time. And obviously I understand why they do that, but they don't really have that time in the exam, and that can impact then on the C question for them. They need to study the sources well before they start writing. Really the more simple answers just kind of talked about source A says this, source B says that. They didn't really typically understand what they had to do. And we did see a lot of kind of middle answers, the level 2 answers. So there were lots more level 3 this year than we have had before. They were looking for agreement, difference, and then a consideration of the extent. Okay. It doesn't have to be a disagreement. It can just be a difference. So, perhaps it's worth getting that across to them, that they don't have to necessarily look for that disagreement. It can be more a subtle difference. But direct disagreements should be used when they're, considering the extent to which they agree or disagree. Okay. So if we go to the question C, I will give you a minute or so to ponder what was the key to success on this question and common mistakes that the candidates made. Okay, so this isn't a trot through the extract and sources to find evidence to support the hypothesis. Candidates need to use their contextual knowledge to really assess the extent to which the extract and the sources both support and oppose the hypothesis. And if possible, they need to use their contextual knowledge really as another means of providing support and opposition. So what the most successful candidates did is also reach a judgment on the extent of support. Now, typically we'd see that at the end, but I saw some really good ones this year where they actually make that throughout the out their answer as they're kind of going along. Some make it at the beginning, but it needs to be there to get, for a really good answer. So the key to success here was really showing that they appreciated there was two sides of an argument, using the extract, using the two sources, using their contextual knowledge. That means trying to use each element on each side of the equation. So that, there's a lot to do here. Using contextual knowledge, that doesn't necessarily mean they have to write a paragraph of useful information to support an answer. Equally, they could have applied it to using contextual knowledge to support a comment on the extract or on the sources. A judgment is needed. Was the interpretation one that could be, accepted, and that needs to have been explained. Not, you don't really want a judgment that is undeveloped to get into those top level answers. So really, the if you look, if you've got your mark scheme there, if you have a look at your mark scheme later, there's 4 bullet points here. So really, the explained evaluation is really where it says in the mark scheme they need to review alternative views and come to that sustained judgment. It's really, you know, how well they're explaining, how well that answer is explained is really what we're looking for. And to get the top answers, you really are looking for precise analysis. And it's that word precise. The level 3 answers are kind of good analysis, but the level 4 answers are precise analysis of the materials, and that they're deploying that to support what they've said. The third bullet point in each of the levels is their contextual knowledge. Now, if it's just very generalized, it's going to be a lot lower down the levels, level 1 and level 2, with just really some relevant knowledge, not done very well at all. Getting up into the level 3, they're showing what they know about it. You know, they know stuff. They know, they can support what they're saying because they know stuff. Typically would be your level 3. But your level 4 answers, again, it's using that word precise. They're precisely selecting contextual knowledge, and they're using that to support their evaluation. So that has to be done really well, and that's what successful candidates were doing. It was the information that they were choosing was precisely chosen to support what they were saying, and that's what the successful candidates did. And like I said, the judgment, it can really appear anywhere, and I saw some really good ones weaved in and out, but it's fine. You know, it's often bolted on at the end, but as long as it's there, it's justified. But, you know, we're talking about really successful candidates. I would say, you know, the better answers, the better scripts have got it as they're going along. I'm doing that there. Okay, so if we go on to section B for paper 2. And moving on to question A, what was the key to success here? And what common mistakes did candidates make? Okay, well, the first thing we do here is say, are there 2? They're looking at 2. We look at an example of the medicine one from this year, explain 2 ways in which the role of local authorities in public health after 1875 was different from before. So it's about comparison. So those candidates who answered it successfully demonstrated their understanding by using terms, things such as whereas, but, however, all of which enable them to show differences. So that's really, you know, a key for them is using those words, because invariably then they will go on to show a difference. Less successful candidates wrote about things before 1875 and then wrote about things after 1875, and then there was no linking. something worth noting that sometimes these questions give a hint to the topic to be considered by using a term or a date, and better responses show an understanding. So for the question, for the health question, they showed that it was about the impact of the 1875 Public Health Act. So it really is worth focusing and looking at those dates. So when we look at these, we will look and see, are there two? And if they only deal with one, again, they're going to be stuck in that level 2. We really want explicit comparisons, and this is different, and then support, you know, they need support from both periods, but they don't need to say why. So there's no credit for saying why, they just need to show that difference. It was like this, then it was like this, that then. So that's really what the successful candidates would be doing there. So we've talked about comparative terminology. That's really a key to success. And we'll go on to question B. So a bit of ponder time for you. Okay, so again, this question was not about the topic in the question, but causation, what made it come about. So the best answers did not write about improvements in surgery, but they instead focused on what it was that made those improvements happen. Most importantly, they explained why those factors brought about improvement. Rather than leaving it, you know, the examiner feels they're doing all the work, because they're leaving it for the examiner to work out what it is they meant, you know, what the candidate meant. So they just very clearly explained why those factors brought about improvement. So if we look at the question from this year, explain 2 causes of improvements in surgery. This question was not about how surgery improved, but why. So what the answer has to do is provide 2 causes of the change. So we need an explanation of why those causes brought about improvements. It's not enough for them to say they use carbolic acid and then write, you know, everything they know about carbolic acid. They need to say why carbolic acid improves surgery. So there's no how far in the question. They don't need to consider ways in which there were not improvements. So simple generalized information is going to keep them typically in level 1. They start to give more specific information about what it is a typical level 2 answer. And again, with only one, it's asking for 2 causes. So if they only do one and they do it really, really exceptionally well, they are going to be stuck on 4 marks. They're not going to have an access to level 3. So need to kind of circle that too. And really the best answers are saying why it makes the outcome happen, what it is they're talking about it, and why it makes the outcome happen. There. So relevant points, obviously we talked about carbolic acid. Few of them talked about X-rays, developments in safer blood transfusions, things like that. But we're not going to talk specifically about questions. I was just thinking about some good ones that I saw, because this was done well, typically. So if we look at the C, if you remember, I said for the C question here, we can look at that as the same as paper 1. Just have a think, see what you can remember from what we talked about then, and we'll just go over really what the key to success is on this question and common mistakes that the candidates made. I won't test you, I promise. But, I know I've gone through this fairly quickly, but it has allowed that we've got enough time. I think we could probably open the chat so I could have a look at the chat now, if that's okay.
How Jacqueline? Okay, the chat is now able.
That's brilliant.
Enabled.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So if we look at this C question, looking at the key to success and common mistakes. So we're looking, the really successful candidates really direct their answers consistently at the focus of the question. They're showing that line of reasoning, and they're giving that analytical explanation that is logical. So that's your AO2. And then they're supporting that with the information they're giving. Again, we're using that precise word. That's typically used for these questions in that level 4. That precise, accurate, relevant information, precisely selected to address the question. They're showing a wide range of knowledge, and they're basically using their contextual knowledge to give a really clear explanation. And then that last bullet point in the mark scheme, that was done. Successful candidates really did that well this year, where they talked about it was because of this, not that, and they were able to really weave that. I saw some lovely answers that were weaving that throughout their answers. So they really need to address at least 3 aspects. They're not going to get into level 4 unless they do. So it's a shame when you see some really good answers and they've not done that, and then they're stuck at that 10 marks because they've just done 2 aspects incredibly well, but they haven't given that 3rd one. So and timing is an issue there. So they really do need to focus on that, because invariably they might have just spent far too long perhaps on the B question, and then the C question suffers. So it's about looking at the marks the questions are worth and really gauging how they do that. Right, so we've got lots of questions going on in the chat that I need to grab hold of now. So I'm going to Oh, I will, hang on. So yeah, so you Nash has told you how you get a copy of the slides if you want them, so you're able to download those. Just so if you go to the resources button, you'll be able to download those and save them, so you'll have them there. So Melissa, thank you. So you've said on paper 1, question A, is it vital the students write about what the author has chosen to focus on and what they've left out? They don't have to use a mission. We do see some really good ones that use a mission, but they don't. Equally, they can get the full marks if they're just talking about what the author has chosen to focus on. It's about using the language. So it's about, you know, why they've said what they've said to create that impression. So they can do that very well and get 6 marks. But what they can do is do that. They can talk about a few, you know, adverbs or whatever, and why they've chosen to say that to create that impression that, you know, the football team was rubbish. They've done that by using these words. But they can also talk about what they've left out to create that impression. So they're trying to create the impression that the football team is rubbish by not talking about the fact that they've just won their last 5 games. And they're deliberately not choosing to say that. So that will be good. So hopefully that answers your question there, Melissa. They don't have to do that, but they can do. But they, you know, I've seen lots of good ones that get 6 marks without doing that. So Christopher has said, please could you comment on if introductions on the 16-mark questions were helpful? I think they're always helpful on those ones. They, you know, if a candidate doesn't do that, they can still get into the level 4. But I think the introduction, clearly, if I, so I'm going to have a look at some exams. So I've got I'm a bit old school. I'm sorry, I don't, so poor Nash has got to help me because I am not technical at all. So I've got paper everywhere. So yeah, invariably, I'm just having a look through sort of my materials from the summer and just quickly flicking through some of the C ones here. And typically, you know, those level 4 answers will all have a really a nice clear introduction laying out what they're going to do, but it isn't, they're not going to be penalized if they don't do it, but it's good practice. Does that help, Chris? It's I think it is good practice to do that. You don't want to be wasting your time in doing that on the A's and B's at all. You want to go straight into the answer. But I think with the 16, I think it's good practice because it helps them. If, however, they've messed up on their timings, just go straight in and get your stuff down. But they've messed up their timings. They've kind of left themselves vulnerable with that last question anyway. So it's important to get that. So, but yes, please, to answer your question. Lucy, for features questions, can you have causes, events, and consequences? Yes. I hope that was enough there, but yes. And Chances are, how do you reckon, how much own knowledge is needed in the 6-mark question on what impression? It's really, a mission would be own knowledge, wouldn't it? But really we're looking at why that impression is created. So for that impression question, sorry, I keep losing, I've got my chat and I'm scrolling and it's jumping. So yeah, so you're on paper 1, the impression question. Yeah, that isn't about own knowledge. That's about the impression that why has the author chosen to use those words? Why have they chosen to say what they're saying? So own knowledge would need to come in if they were going to talk about a mission, but they can just talk about, you know, they've used that adverb, they've said poorly to show that it didn't work properly. So we're not looking at own knowledge. They're not going to be rewarded for that, although by default they would be awarded it for a mission, I guess. Okay, Navida's asked about tone. It's again, they could do it really well without using tone, but I've seen some lovely ones that talk about tone, and certainly tone to create an impression. They would really be the successful candidates tend to talk about those. You don't tend to see those in the weaker answers. But yeah, I love the ones that use tone because it really, tone makes all the difference, doesn't it? But I wouldn't say it's important. It's certainly not vital. They can still get 6 marks without doing it. But I think it's good practice. I do like those ones. Christos has said, what amount of detail do you expect for paper 2 section B question A? Just really a couple of short paragraphs, so really 4 to 5 sentences, and you can get full marks. I mean, I've seen full marks pretty early on in that, if it's very specific and they've got their information down. So you've given an example there. Is it enough to name the difference, how often the UN met? Then say for the League of Nations it was like this, and for the UN it was like that. Perfect. So you know, you could say, well, the League of Nations did it this way, the United Nations do it this way, and that's fine. Yeah, perfect. And Julia has said, please may I ask if on paper 1, if students do 2 bullet points on the paper 1 question, students do 2 bullet points and one of them is their own information. So you're on about the C question. Yes, absolutely. So they would need to achieve full marks, they would need 3 aspects of content. So they don't have to use any of the bullet points. Typically they will, because those bullet points will be things that people normally would talk about, but we will be expecting those better answers, those, you know, typically anything past 10 marks is going to be bringing in probably their own knowledge. Anyway, sorry, I've got a bit croaky. If they do, I think perhaps you mean, Julia, if they do 2 of the bullet points that are provided and 1 of their own. If you mean that, that is enough to get you full marks, because you're going to have 3 aspects then. If they only do 2 bullet points, 1 of them is their own. Yeah, I think that's what you meant. Oh, thank you, but thank you. I was a bit worried I went through too quickly because I was really worried about the timing, and then I realized that I perhaps had rushed a bit at the beginning, so I apologize that there, and I will reflect on that. But normally I've done it a bit longer time-wise. So Shugnathi, I hope I've said that right. How many paragraphs should they write in paper 2 section A? So we want 3. I don't really like to say, because there's no hard and fast rule there. So I would teach it. You've got an introduction, conclusion, and 3 paragraphs, so probably 5, but that is not any, you know, we don't look at that when we're marking it. We mark what they've written, and we follow the mark scheme. That's good practice, perhaps in teaching. Yes, Lucy, it is. Yeah, even if it's done really well. And James has said, for the C on paper 2, should candidates focus on a theme? For example, for change in agriculture, gosh, that question this year. I marked a few of those. Talking about how land ownership changes, or can they simply explain each event? I mean, they can do it either way. And really, I guess that's how you choose to teach it, really there. But I think the better answers would be more focusing on theme, and perhaps for the less able candidates, they will do more simple explanations of events. And then Julia says, furthermore, for the 16 marker on section A in paper 2, can students disagree with the question? So if there is a question about whether flappers were the main reason for changes for women, can they then do a second paragraph on a second reason for changes for women, but a third paragraph on how things did not change for women at all? So let me just make sure I'm reading this correctly. If there's a question about, so flappers were the main reason, which they're going to talk about. They then do a second paragraph on another reason for a change for women. And then they'll talk about how things did not change for women at all. Yeah, that's fine. That's good practice. That's fine. So I just wanted to make sure that I was reading it correctly there. Okay, Alice has asked a question, a good question there. What exactly is needed for the impression question on paper 1? You really want to try and get 2 or 3 examples. So your impression can be that it didn't work. Okay, so they're saying that this didn't work. Why are they saying that? And look for maybe 3 examples. So if they do 2 really well, but 3 kind of nails it. There we go. Now she's just reminding you about the slides. Jonathan's saying about introduction and conclusion. I've already answered that one. And good practice, but you don't have to. And yes, you can obviously disagree with the statement, but if that would just be one-sided. We're looking for a balance. Okay, Julia, I don't, that's really, it's a tricky question to answer. You're asking how long. Kids always ask this, don't they? And it's a bit, how long's a piece of string? Because it just depends, because, you know, they can write half a page and it could be a waffle, but they could actually write maybe 4 or 5 lines and get full marks. So it's really about what they're saying, not how much they've written. So, I mean, obviously, you know, if they just write 4 or 5 lines, they're not going to get 16 marks for the essay question. But we don't need, for those first 2, like I said, for the 6 and the 8 marker, we really don't want them wasting too much time on that. They don't need to be writing an awful lot. And like I've said, I have seen some really good answers for that A question that are quite shortly done. But certainly I wouldn't want over half a page on that. You know, they will have said, and they'll just probably be repeating themselves then. So but I'm not going to get into how, you know, because I don't think I can answer that. Oh, Lucy, I don't, and so Nash, Lucy's having difficulty downloading the resources, if you can just help there. And I'm sorry I didn't get round to everybody's question, but we're out of time now. But hopefully I answered enough there that people can. And if you do still have questions, please email into Pearson, and I'm more than happy, you know, to respond, and they'll come through to myself or Nigel Kelly, and we can help with that.